Thank you for tuning in to the Natty News Daily podcast. This episode is brought to you in part by our sponsor, Core Nutritionals. You can check out corenutritionals.com for all your supplement needs and use code Natty News Daily at checkout to save 20%. Enjoy the episode.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Natty News Daily podcast. It is just Dan and I today. No guest, no Leroy. We booted him. You're stuck with us for the remainder of this episode. We're just gonna chat in this one. That sounds like super like off the cuff, but we do have an idea, and it is to kind of walk the newer members of our bodybuilding family, or especially the natural bodybuilding family, through kind of like the landscape of the sport right now. Because we were just chatting beforehand, it's pretty confusing even to us at times, right? All the different organizations, different rules within organizations, qualifications for certain shows, who respects pro cards of other people's. And so if it's confusing for us, I'm sure it's confusing for the new bodybuilding competitor or especially the debut competitor, right? So we're going to try and clarify some things throughout this episode, and I'm sure there's topics we won't even touch. If that's something that we haven't kind of discussed and you're looking for more insight, definitely reach out to us, comment, all that kind of stuff, and we can address that specifically for you guys. But I'm going to stop rambling and I'm going to turn it over to Dan to start this discussion off.
Yeah, so I just figured, with the season kind of kicking off here in I don't know when the first show is this year, but usually right around this time of year. We're
Mm-hmm.
past the Christmas New Year's break, so shows start kicking into gear, and I'm sure there's a lot of athletes that are, competing in the spring, and then also thinking about competing, in summer and fall shows, starting
Mm-hmm.
their preps, and just looking at what shows to compete in, where to look. Um, you know, uh, there's you touched on it. There's so many different organizations and shows, and um, as we've discussed previously, on and off air, like there can be a definite quality discrepancy between some of the quote unquote bottom tier shows and the top tier shows, and that's not
Mm-hmm.
even necessarily like equating to like pro versus amateur. Like there are amateur
Mm-hmm.
shows that are run absolutely brilliantly. There are pro shows that are run meh. So,
Mm-hmm.
and and at least for me, like it's not from what I've seen. Correct me if I'm wrong, James, but it's not even. I wouldn't even say one organization kind of has a quote unquote stranglehold on
Mm-hmm.
good shows. Like I think from what I've seen, there's great shows in numerous organizations. OCB
Mm-hmm.
has some great shows. WNBF has some great shows, or INBF has some great shows. And I've
Mm-hmm.
seen some lackluster or shows in those are two organizations I've competed in, other than Mr. America, which is unaffiliated. But within those two organizations, I've seen the spectrum. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, what's your thought process? You coach a lot of athletes and guiding
Mm-hmm.
them in terms of, picking shows. So I'm curious. I kind of have some ideas, but I'm curious what your
Mm-hmm.
process is for.
Yeah, so it depends on their experience level, right? Like obviously I want to put someone in a good show, but if it's their first show ever, I'm not gonna, if they're a North Carolina athlete, I have a couple of those, I'm not gonna tell them to go to Texas for a show, even though there are some great shows in Texas where I know they'd have, a fantastic experience. Just because for them, you kind of want to just figure out, is this the right sport for me? But at the same time, you don't want to put them in a super weak show because that's their first experience with the sport. So you got to find that happy medium. And that comes, in my opinion, for the first time competitor, comes down to just knowing the promoters of the shows, which we are starting to build that network and build that relationship and kind of know. And if we don't, we know someone who does know. So finding a good promoter, regardless of the organization, I think is probably for the debut competitor or for the novice competitor the top priority, because if you trust and respect that promoter, they're probably going to put on a good show, and if you do, that means that other coaches probably do as well, and that's going to turn out to be somewhat of a hub of a show, right? Versus it's the first season that this show's been run, you're not even really sure who the promoter is, are they a pro even in their own organization? It's kind of like this I've seen it before where I think it's slightly predatory of some organizations where they just let anybody promote, it seems like. And that's not a discredit on any organization. I'm sure it happens across the board because it's a business at the end of the day. But you want to know that that person like truly knows and loves the sport, because then they're going to invest themselves like fully into it. Because I've been to some shows myself. It was the second year that it was run. And I mean, when I go like thinking back about that, just details, right? Like there weren't even names on the trophies, like first place, second place. It was literally just the name of the show. Didn't even say what you won. It's just the show name on the trophy. It's like, wait a second. Like if that
Yeah.
detail's overlooked, what else was overlooked, right? So yeah, I to kind of summarize that, knowing the promoter is probably one of the biggest things I think early on.
I tend to agree. And I think you made a good point about, location as well. I mean, I think for a first show, if you can find a show within driving distance,
Mhm,
I think that's preferable. I tend to think that's preferable. Obviously, there's some people that might not live in areas where
mhm,
there's lots of shows promoted, or like the one show that is local to them is not, necessarily a, well-run show. I mean,
mhm,
not that you need a crazy high spectacle show for your first show.
mhm,
Um, but but even if it's not high spectacle, if it's well expedited, if the lighting's decent, like even if
mhm,
it's running like, I've like my first show was in the OCB, the Pittsburgh show, and Stacy Longo I think puts on a really good show. I mean, it was held in a high school, but like nice big auditorium.
mhm,
Stage lighting was very good, photography was good.
mhm,
Generally, a well-run show.
mhm.
So um, that's kind of something that, I think
Yeah.
is valuable too, to look for, a local show if you can, just with, especially with, figuring out
Mhm,
what you need to do, um, you know, backstage when you show up, all the polygraphs and the tanning and all that sort of stuff. And if you can, do that from basically your home base, I think that's definitely a benefit,
mhm,
because there's just a lot of
mhm,
things to navigate, especially as a new competitor. And even for me, like, every time I start a new season, I mean, I guess I've only done 2 seasons, but like that first show is still kind of, even for me, it's kind of, dusting off the cobwebs a little bit, like, okay, this is the system. And then I remember,
mhm.
as my season progresses, I'm always like, I know the rhythm of what to do. Like, I need to do this, I need to do that. I know
Yeah.
what needs to be done backstage, peaking, foods, all that stuff. So
So what would you consider local? So for me, when I start looking at
yeah.
shows, even for myself or for more so for myself, for my athletes, like leave it up to them a little bit more, but some of my more competitive and more serious athletes, the people that I think are going to try and make some sort of career out of this, I won't hesitate to look up to like 4 hours away, because I feel like a 4 hour drive time is pretty well, like you could probably find a good show, if not maybe one of the better shows within that distance. And then you're not just kind of putting yourself in a box by saying, I'm just doing the show that's in my hometown, right? Because that you might
Yeah,
get lucky. I feel like I did get lucky, right? The New York State Natural, the Syracuse shows run by Mike Halsey are, I think, some of the better amateur shows around.
those are
And
really good shows. Yeah.
I just happened to live in Syracuse at the time. So yeah, I got lucky. My first experience was great, but then I saw other shows, right? So
Hmm.
yeah, if you're not lucky enough to be 5 minutes away from the venue of, a really great show, to me, 4 hours is doable, especially from a financial
Yeah.
standpoint. You're not looking at a flight. You can, you don't have to take off a ton of days of work. Maybe you take the day before the show off. You drive in the morning, you check in, you get to relax that afternoon, evening, because that's a big part, right? You've done it yourself where you've kind of rolled in, checked in, tan, polygraph, jump in bed and try and chill before you ruin your peak. And that can be super stressful.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean it's a little bit of a gray area what you define as, too far. I mean, and it's going to depend on, it's very individual,
Mhm,
like, depending on what area they live in. If they live in a metropolitan area, they probably can find a show within an hour.
mhm,
I think that's always a great option. If you can stay at home, you don't have to go to a hotel, or stay in an Airbnb or anything like that. You have your home base and your home kitchen and all that stuff, and you can just commute back and forth. And you saw that we did that at the Yorton, um,
mhm.
in Pittsburgh. It was, super convenient. Um, but I had some other thought, but yeah, that's I was gonna go back to something you said prior. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Well,
Um,
I'm gonna
Go
keep
ahead.
rambling while you're thinking.
Keep
So
rambling.
we talked about promoters. We talked about maybe like the distance of the
Yeah.
show, right? Um, I think it's key to kind of point out too that the depth of these shows very much, in my opinion, depends on when in the year it is, right? Especially as you get more competitive. This is gearing a little bit away from those debut competitors because for you, it's just about getting the experience. You might be someone who's lucky enough to compete once, go pro, and then compete pro. But for most amateur competitors, it's not going to happen. So your spring shows inevitably are going to be a little bit more shallow, I think, and a little bit maybe those athletes aren't at their peak condition if they do plan to compete again. Where the later you go in the year, you're going to see more athletes in those shows because they're trying to qualify for some of the bigger shows, especially at the pro ranks, or athletes that feel more confident that they can get those pro cards because you don't want to have this huge, year long season where you qualify in the early spring and then have to hold that conditioning until November for some of these big shows. So I think inevitably your more competitive athletes, you might want to kind of steer them either to go super early in the year and then be able to like reverse for a bit, or really condense everything and just hit like September, October, November, and then just be done.
Yeah, I think having a nice condensed season is a good idea. And you don't necessarily have to have every single show picked like from the
Mm-hmm.
outset, like the beginning of your prep. You might be able to like pick your first show and like, okay, I want to start with this show, and then there's a bunch of other shows. Maybe I'll do these, and as you go along, you kind of figure out what which ones you want to plug in. So actually, I remember what I was going to ask, but before I get into that is, um, just looking at, what drug-free show, what natural shows are out there. I highly recommend, and I think you might have seen this, is Peter Fitchin. He puts
Mm-hmm.
out a really good, it's on his Instagram. If you need help finding it, it's um, just send me a DM. But it's not too far. It's only a few posts back. He lists out all the drug tested shows. Well, maybe there's probably a couple he missed, but almost all, a very comprehensive list of drug tested shows in
Mm-hmm.
2023, and it's like a multi-slide.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I think that's a
it's
really, really good resource. I would highly recommend kind of starting there and understanding, what shows are out there, um, what organizations are putting it on, and then from there, if there are shows that you're interested in that list, I would, probably go to their website and you can find more information. But moving on past that, I think that's good. I think it's important to get that out there. Is you talked about knowing the promoter and knowing who's putting on the show. I would see maybe it could be a hurdle for a younger athlete, newer athlete, or even, I don't know everyone. I actually would say
mm-hmm.
venture to say I don't know most of the promoters still. Um,
Mm-hmm.
how would you go about um figuring out which promoters are good, what type of show
Mm-hmm.
they've put on in the past? Would you look at maybe, asking around, soliciting
Mm-hmm.
feedback? Would you maybe just scroll Instagram and, find some people that competed at the show?
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, luckily in the social media world, a lot of the websites have results. So you can see names of at least people that competed there. So one, you can see how many were there, right? So you can see how many people competed in it last year. If you can track down some of the names through social media, you can specifically ask those people. You can search the actual show Instagram page because a lot of them are doing that now, where each
that's a
individual
good
show
point.
will have its own and just look at some of the athletes that they're posting and some of the content that they're putting out. And you can tell kind of like the personality of the promoter by the way that they post oftentimes. And then, yeah, just reaching out to different coaches that you may know, different athletes you may know. I mean, people are pretty open about sharing this stuff because we want each athlete to have a good experience, right? I'm not going to, even if it's not my athlete, someone asks me about a show, I'm going to be honest with them, right? I would never want to put my name and reputation out there and say, like, oh, go to the show, it's great. And they show up and there's, 30 athletes there total.
Yeah,
That's just
yeah.
not going to be good on me, right?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think I mean, as we've kind of discussed, I think there's lots of good, information on the websites, but I think word of mouth and hearing it directly from the competitors and directly from, the people that are involved with the shows, I think is a good route to go to find out if the shows are, you know,
Hmm.
worth doing. And
Hmm.
then if you can, find if there's lots of people posting their photos from a show, that's probably a good sign too, I would
Hmm.
think. So
Yeah, absolutely. And this obviously like big asterisks, like this is all about the US right now. Like we're not diving into all the different international affiliates of every single other federation because we just simply don't know them as
yeah, I
well.
don't know enough.
Maybe we bring like Stephen Pascal on to chat about what's going on across the pond at some point. But yeah, like specific to the
Yeah,
US, maybe to Canada a little bit because of our good buddy Leroy. He's got a little bit inside knowledge there. But yeah, so do we want to discuss federations and things we've noticed with that, or do we want to just leave that to the side since that's such a contentious point sometimes?
I don't care. I'll discuss whatever.
Okay. Okay. So let's start amateur, right? Because this discussion has been about kind of educating the younger athletes. The pros know where they're going to go. They probably are competing with one fed or a couple feds at this point. So let's talk. You've never competed bodybuilding before. Forget about geographics. Obviously that's going to be some aspect, right? Or I guess we can discuss that. Let's discuss that really quickly, and then we'll go into like our perfect situation. So East Coast right now, in my opinion, large emphasis OCB, WNBF. Obviously, you do have the ANBF, which is more central to the Virginia, New Jersey, that kind of area, like central East Coast. They are expanding. Joe's kind of helping that out a little bit. So I would say those three organizations probably would come to my mind first. I know also the NGA has a few shows on the East Coast, but
Yeah, I think they have a
I'd say
few in Philly, and
top,
I think the
yeah.
USBF ventures out to Pennsylvania. But yeah, like especially like the Northeast, yeah, that's
Mhm,
definitely, reflective. I think the IMBF seems to have a biggest presence, yeah, in that Northeast region. Um,
mhm,
at least, yeah. And then they have the West, but yeah, I think that's a good
mhm.
for the
And
Northeast
then
folks,
as we go, middle of the country, that's very much, I think, controlled by the NANBF, right?
which is the
IPE
IPE
affiliate.
affiliate. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of shows out there, but you are seeing GBO down in Texas. I believe the NGA has a little bit in the Midwest. USBF has a few shows, including like their premier show out
Yeah,
that way.
USPF does have a good presence, and I think Natty Revolution, I think has some shows. I've heard good things about their Michigan show,
Yes,
from
they
some
they seem
people.
to, I believe, like two or three in the Michigan area, not just Michigan State itself. So they're, another option as well. And they've been growing in recent years. Don't have as many options, but some good shows from what I've heard. Yeah, Jake Jake talks about those a lot.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then as we head out West Coast, that's kind of it's interesting, right? Like INBA, PNBA, that's kind of like their hub, in my opinion, even though they do have a ton of international affiliates. But you are seeing, some of the best INBF shows, Muscle Mayhem, right
Out
there.
in
And then you've got some
California,
other
yeah.
ones. So INBF and INBA, in my opinion, again, probably the two big ones on the West Coast there.
I would say there's probably some OCB shows out that way. OCB is pretty spread out. I
Hmm.
think OCB has, I think, the most shows in total
Yeah.
of the organization. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, I think those two are probably the, you know, two with the biggest presence out that way.
Hmm.
What
Hmm.
about the South,
Agreed.
like Florida and that sort of area? Um,
Yeah.
who
So I think
promotes the
things are
Florida shows? Is that
I
an
think things
NGA?
are changing. So it was NGA. I believe some of those shows have transferred over to the WPA now with its inception. Um, I think there's some I think it's a really just a grab bag right now. Like OCB, WPA, NGA. At one point, well, we know, Chris Barakat had his show there for 1 year. There might be a return of that in the future. Who knows about that? Yeah, it just seems like there's a lot going on kind of down in Florida specifically. I don't think quite as much going on in like Carolinas and Georgia, even though, like you
I
said,
think
OCB has.
INBF. promotes a show in Carolina, I think.
There's one, yeah. So
Yeah.
the Carolina PC, I think, is what it's called. There's that one show, but that's one, right? So
Yeah.
not a lot of opportunity elsewhere. Um, but like you said, I think the number was like 45 or 46 states had an OCB show at some point in the year. So yeah, you could probably find one anywhere. Just a matter of like quality, right? You gotta
Yeah.
find the good ones that are gonna bring in a lot of people. So yeah, that's pretty much if you want to like rewind and like listen through those, you can probably find something for
Yeah.
yourself, depending on where you're located, where you're listening in from. So let's turn it over to our ideals or things that we see in each organization that we like or don't like, and we can keep it as PG as we want to.
Yeah. So are you talking about specific organizations or within
Yep,
shows, like
yep.
some of the things?
If
I mean, we've covered it.
Yep, someone comes to you, new athlete, and they say, Dan, who should I compete with? What do you say?
Yeah, so I had a conversation with somebody recently, in but local. So highly suggested looking at the Pittsburgh shows, the OCB Pittsburgh shows,
Hmm.
because I had competed in that show. I know they run two shows a year. It's close, well run. I think it's great way to get your feet wet. Um, for someone in another area, I would probably go kind of um, by your kind of guidelines as to, what organizations have a good hold on individual regions. Um, and yeah, I mean, I don't know. It would be very individually dependent on how I would
Hmm.
guide from there.
Yeah.
Um, you know.
Do you think so? Here's an easier question for you. Do you think it's worthwhile to compete in multiple federations your first year?
Um, I think it depends. I don't think I wouldn't necessarily withhold yourself. I wouldn't withhold yourself from competing in multiple organizations. I
Hmm.
probably would encourage it if there is the opportunity to, and if shows, you know, uh, align nicely with your season, your timelines, and your schedule, your work schedule, your you know, travel and all that fun stuff. I mean, if you do have the opportunity, I think it is a good idea to branch out and experience multiple organizations and whatnot. But maybe it doesn't work out for some people. It might make sense that, you know, if you want to do all OCB shows or all IMBF shows because you're in the specific region and a bunch of shows are, make sense and are great for you, then I don't think you should necessarily feel obligated to go to multiple organizations. But I generally would think it's probably a good idea if you can to
Hmm.
to to you know look at multiple organizations. But like I said, I mean, referring back to what we had discussed previously about, not necessarily assessing each show by the organization, but by the
Hmm.
individual promoter and individual show reputation. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah, what
Yeah.
do you think about that?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And it again, I think comes down to like how serious the athlete is about bodybuilding, right? Like if you're just a one and done, find a decent show that's going to give you a good experience. It don't, the federation politics don't matter to you. And the same could probably be said if you're just someone who's going to compete, every couple years just to, motivate yourself to stay in shape. You're not really overly worried about titles. You're not really like a coach trying to like grow their own like personal brand. When those things start getting involved, or when you become like truly invested in the sport, then I think it matters a little bit more. I think I would encourage most of my athletes to compete in as many feds as like financially possible within their early years, just to kind of test it out, right? Because uh, they may find that their region is a different experience than what we found in our regions with the different federations, right? So they may really like one promoter that we're unaware of, and it might be in a different federation than who we would, encourage them to go to. And great, right? Go support that person because that's what you're doing when you're, signing up for the show. You want to vote with your money, right? Like that's the saying. So I wouldn't stress it for the debut person, wouldn't stress it for the novice person. But if you're looking at, repeat competitions going on your second, third year, fourth year, maybe start looking at what these people are trying to do with the sport and their politics and their policies, and does it match up with what you envision for the sport?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think familiarizing yourself with the, what the policies and the values that each organization holds is definitely important. And I
Hmm.
mean, if there is a specific organization that, you want a pro card in this organization or compete, eventually compete in their premier event, then yeah, then have at it. It's one of those things, a lot of, to a large extent, bodybuilding season is limited, so it's not like, I mean, you can compete, at intense shows if you really wanted to, but I think a lot of
Hmm.
times a lot of us are really confined to, I would say maybe like 2 to 4 or 5 shows usually tends to be about
Hmm.
what makes sense in a season. So you're limited in the number of often limited in the number of shows that make sense and that you can do. So you have to pick accordingly. I wouldn't necessarily um you know diversify for the sake of diversifying. If you want a pro card within the INBF to compete in the WNBF, you know you might want to consider doing all your shows or most of your shows in the INBF if you want that pro card. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And everyone listening to this, if you've watched enough of our episodes, you know who we kind of affiliate with more, but that's not to say that there's not fantastic shows elsewhere that we just haven't done, right? Like we all also
for
are
sure.
geographically in a similar region, right? So, none of us, you competed West Coast, but that was a one-time deal, right? Like we haven't
Yeah,
really competed Midwest in the South, West Coast, all those other aspects, right? Our
Leroy's competed
experiences.
abroad. Leroy, yeah.
Well, yeah, he's a bit different, but
Damn
yeah,
Canadians.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm trying to think, are we overlooking anything? Obviously, we've harped on the importance of lighting, the importance of good
Yeah,
photographers, but a lot of these things you're not really going to know unless you've talked with a competitor who did the show or you've seen the photos that have been posted,
yeah,
right? So I guess let's refresh on that again, unless those people haven't listened to that episode, right? The importance of a good photographer is huge, right? We're spending a lot of money. Obviously, your family's going to be there with their, iPhones taking photos, but a high level, high quality professional photo of you on stage in good lighting is something that you're going to remember for forever. I have a couple of mine framed, and when I like finally get the gym and the office set up, like they're going to be up there, and that's something I can look back on and be proud of. And it's not just the grainy iPhone photo, right?
yeah.
These cameras do some great things, but it's just not the same, right?
Yeah, I mean, you prep an entire season, and you get yourself into bodybuilding condition, and you want to display that. You want to show that off in the best light possible, literally. So
Hmm.
to have good show lighting and good photography. That I mean, that's that's something you really want. I mean, you're showcasing on stage, like you want to,
Hmm.
you want something to take home to show off, be like, yeah, I did this. It's a visual sport, and
Hmm.
it's super important. But yeah, like
And
you had said, kind of,
sometimes
yeah,
those photos hit you from different angles that like you don't even see, right? Like we do our posing videos, we take our tripod photos and stuff like that, but I have some photos, just the lighting's right, the angle's right, and it's just like that's me. Like what? No way. I don't
heck,
look that good because you're peaked, you're pumped. It's the culmination of everything. It's culmination of like 6+ months of dedication all in one photo.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so when it does come to fruition, it's really awesome. So yeah, I know we harp on that a lot, but I think it really, really can make a show.
Hmm. Or break it, right? We both have photos that we don't share on social media. And there was a whole album of photos that I got from one of my shows, and I saved three of them because there was the only three that put me in any like good light in the middle, like fully posed, not like in a transition. It's just like really like three photos. That's all I like have to look back on of this, like probably one of my best physiques I've brought to the stage.
Yeah. Yeah, it is disappointing. And I have those too, so
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
yeah. So we're going to continue to harp on that for sure.
I will until the end of times.
Yes. All right. So and this full, disclaimer here, this is going to be very biased, right? Because it can only go from our experience. So this is not to discredit anyone who we don't bring up or any show we don't bring up. What shows excite you, right? So we're both looking forward to a potential 2024 season. What kind of shows are you targeting? Knowing that you're a more experienced competitor, what do you think some of the younger competitors could like take away and where, lead by example here?
In terms of what shows that I'm looking to do, or
Yep. Yep.
yeah, so I'm going to do the Mr. America. That's a given. Around that, I think I do want to pursue a WNBF pro card. I've kind of half-assed pursued that card, just because I've prioritized other shows, other organizations.
Hmm.
So I think next season I think my objective will be basically Mr. America and INBF shows with the goal of a WNBF card. I think is going to be. So I'm going to kind of prioritize those two. So yeah, I mean, I
Hmm.
guess I kind of alluded to prioritizing, but yeah, that's the fact that you asked that question of me, I think because that's something I have thought of
Hmm.
directly is how do I want to prioritize? And I've had that challenge of prioritizing shows because it's a limited season and whatnot. So
Hmm.
um yeah, that's I guess that maybe that says something that I'm thinking about. How do I want to prioritize and really thinking,
Hmm.
rank ordering, what are my priorities? Because there's so many shows out there that I could do, but um,
Hmm.
you know, yeah, those are mine. What about yours?
Yeah. So I'm very hopeful that my life circumstances will be much more stable when I compete next time. So I might have a little bit more financial freedom, a little bit more time freedom within my work schedule to compete a little more frequently, because the most I've done has been 2 shows in a season. I'd like to do a few more, and I'd like to spread them out a little bit more. Last season there was intentions of competing more, but then we moved all the way from Delaware to New York, so that kind of nixed that. I wasn't going to try and settle in to a
Yeah,
new new job, new house. Um, so I feel like I have unfinished business with the New York State Natural. I've competed at that venue 3 times, twice in their November show, once in their April show, and have not come out with a pro card. So I feel like I want to get an OCB pro card, but specifically at that show. I feel like I need to win there just because
and
that's where it all started,
you've
right?
mentioned they run a great show there. They really
They
do.
run a great show. Mike's shows are always good. There's always good competitors, right? Like that's where Leroy got his. There's a lot of just sentimental value to that show with me, or
I see
that group
Leroy's
of
face
shows.
pop up all the time now on
Yeah,
Facebook and on Instagram just for that show on that poster,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is
And
awesome.
and for me to still be local to that, I feel like I gotta establish myself in my own backyard, right? I wanna win that one. That, if possible, right? If I win a pro card there, would open a lot of doors where then potentially could chase some pro shows in other organizations. I'd like the idea of competing with the USBF to see some of their shows because I've heard good things about the way their shows are run. Um, but I think ultimately, just like you, my goal, and this is not a slight on any other organizations, but I don't really have any real interest in competing NGA. I don't have any real interest in competing INBA just because the ultimate like prize there doesn't, I'm not super interested in. I do, however, want to chase that WMBF Pro card because to me, that's WMBF Worlds to me is like where I would want to end up. And I don't have any real hope of being there, but like ideal, that's where I make it. So I think I structure my season early to try and hit an OCB Pro card just to check that off, and then chase that WMBF Pro card with probably ending my season around the Mr. America because that's a great show. I just want to be part of it. I have no expectations of placing well. Those guys are animals, right? And that would be a decision too of would I do that show as a bodybuilder or a classic physique competitor because I have competed in both. I've done actually better as a classic physique competitor than I did a bodybuilder. So that'll be a discussion I have with our circle or whoever I decide to mentor me through that prep process as I get closer and determine my shape and stuff. But I think unless I somehow scrape a pro win together to qualify for a big show, it'll probably be ending it at in Atlantic City, Mr. America, next to you, and hopefully Leroy, if we can convince him to.
Yeah, that'd be dope. It's a spread out season though. Not gonna lie.
It is. It is. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. I'm trying to make that season be as stress-free as possible by getting leaner earlier, right? So, and this is kind of a side tangent. I said that. Now I'm going to think about that because have you listened to Steve's podcast? He
Yeah,
always says
he
that and then he
mentioned
catches
it.
it.
It doesn't bother me. I hear other people saying it too. It doesn't bother
I
me.
know. I don't ever say it. That's like the first time I've said it. Now it's gonna stick with me now. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent. I don't even know what I was gonna say. Oh, I dropped from 220. I'm now like mid 190s with the goal of ending this deficit at like 180, 185 and just staying there the rest of the year. Right. I'm still gonna hopefully gain a little bit of muscle, but I'm not going to make this huge 40-pound drop like I have in my other seasons. When I decide to compete, I want it to be like 20 pounds maximum, 15 pounds would be great. And I can do that 15 pounds so much easier than I can do 40 to 50 pounds, which I've done in
Yeah.
the past. So hopefully the systemic stress, that would be hopefully getting better sleep because my sleep schedule and my work schedule and everything is nice and stable. I think I should be able to do it.
Yeah, that'll be of benefit to you. And then if you did need to take off a few more, you have that time. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The difference of
that's
taking off 15 and having some wiggle room and having to take off 45 and then hitting the end and still needing 5 or 6 to come off. That's very different.
yes. So I think we'll wrap this up here. Thanks for listening to us discuss and talk, and hopefully this is insightful to a lot of you new competitors or hopeful competitors, that fun stuff. So um, drop us a follow. Like I'm doing the outro. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, you just jumped right into it.
Have fun here.
I don't know. I just ramble anyway, right? Like,
Yeah,
subscribe,
I know.
follow, share, all those
Do
other
all that
social
fun
media
stuff.
terms.
All
Yeah,
the
that's what
stuff
we
that
ask
people are
for.
telling.